There is an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It has white sand beaches and water so clear you can see the bottom from 30 feet above. But this place holds one of the most tightly guarded government secrets of the 20th century. For generations, a community lived here. The Chagossian people were descendants of enslaved Africans brought to work French colonial plantations in the 18th century. When the French left, the people stayed. They built homes, buried their dead, and raised children in complete isolation. Their entire identity was tied to the islands. In their native Creole, they had a specific phrase for this archipelago. Translated cleanly, it means the place we come from. In 1968, the United States government decided it needed that land. They didn't attempt to share it. They didn't try to negotiate. They simply decided to take it. The operation to remove the population took 6 years. It was heavily classified, buried deep inside government files for nearly 4 decades. The victims of this land grab were erased so completely, hidden beneath so much paperwork, that most of the world does not even know their name. Looking at a map of the Indian Ocean during the mid-1960s reveals a strategic problem. The Pentagon had powerful bases in Europe and Asia, but this vast stretch of water connecting the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia was a massive, uncontrolled blind spot. Diego Garcia sat almost exactly in the center. A military base positioned here could launch aircraft capable of reaching 3 separate continents within hours. To secure it, the United States approached the United Kingdom in 1966. Together, they signed a secret agreement to detach the Chagos Islands from Mauritius, which was nearing independence, and create a brand new territory. The deal bypassed parliamentary debate entirely. In exchange for 50 years of free use of the islands, the United States quietly handed Britain a $14 million discount on the purchase of Polaris nuclear missiles. The Chagossians were never consulted. In an internal British diplomatic memo discussing the inhabitants whose home was being sold, they were described, and this is a direct quote, as a few Tarzans and Man Fridays. 2 powerful democracies signed away the homeland of an entire civilization of human beings, treating them as a negligible obstacle in a classified budget negotiation. To carry out the removal, the operation required a legal shield. The British Foreign Office needed a loophole to make the Chagossians illegal on their own land. In 1971, Britain passed a new immigration ordinance. Because the Chagossians had never been formally recognized as citizens on paper, the government simply reclassified them as temporary contract laborers. With a single signature, 2,000 people lost the right to exist in their own home. The physical removal did not start with soldiers pointing guns. It began quietly. Islanders who traveled to Mauritius for medical treatment were told, upon trying to return, that the boats were no longer running. Then, authorities cut off the supply ships that delivered food to the islands. Soon after, British officials instructed the plantation owners who employed the islanders to stop paying wages. Life on the islands was systematically made impossible. Left with no food, no income, and no other way to survive, the remaining population was ordered onto vessels built for freight, not passengers. On the docks, before boarding, islanders watched as authorities gathered their pet dogs and gassed them. British and American officials logged it as a routine pest control measure. For the Chagossians, it was a terrifying demonstration of their absolute powerlessness. Families were packed into the dark holds of the cargo ships. They arrived in foreign ports thousands of miles away with only what they could carry, receiving 0 compensation or resettlement support. As they departed, officials promised them they could return once the military operations were finished. It was a calculated lie. The governments knew the islands were permanently closed. The exiled Chagossians found themselves stranded in the slums of Port Louis, Mauritius. They arrived in a country that barely had enough resources for its own population, leaving them without work permits, legal status, or basic shelter. Within a decade, the community suffered massive spikes in malnutrition and severe depression. Community leaders documented a cluster of deaths they attributed to sagren, a Chagossian Creole word describing a grief so heavy it physically breaks the body. While the islanders suffered, the military leveled their villages to build naval support facility Diego Garcia. It grew into one of the most strategically vital military installations on Earth, housing nuclear submarines, pre-positioned warships, and B-52 bombers. Decades later, following September 11th, Diego Garcia's name began surfacing in a darker context. As the CIA expanded its global detention and interrogation program, the isolated island provided an ideal location, hidden from external oversight. A British Foreign Office minister eventually admitted to Parliament that rendition flights carrying detainees had refueled at the base on at least 2 occasions. Yet the identities of those detainees and the full extent of the operations on the island remain sealed. An island methodically stolen through bureaucratic paperwork to secure the international order was ultimately utilized as a black site, operating entirely outside the boundaries of international law. The Chagossians spent decades fighting back in court. In the year 2000, a British High Court finally ruled their expulsion unlawful, granting them the right to return. In response, the British government invoked an archaic monarchical power called an Order in Council to explicitly override the court and ban them again. The fight reached the International Court of Justice in 2019. The court unequivocally ruled that Britain's continued occupation of the Chagos Islands was illegal, and the United Nations demanded the territory be returned. Britain refused. The United States, prioritizing its continued use of the military base, fully supported the refusal, ignoring the international legal consensus. In 2024, Britain announced a preliminary agreement to transfer sovereignty of the islands to Mauritius, but the negotiations were held strictly between the two governments. The Chagossians themselves were deliberately excluded from the room. Today, the children who were forced onto those cargo ships are in their 60s and 70s. Many of the original exile generation are dying, still waiting to see the place they come from. They did not lose their home to a natural disaster or a war. They were erased by the very institutions that govern the modern world, using carefully filed paperwork that remains sealed to this day.